at 9 a.m. here. Just welcome everybody to our first Lifeworks Connects session. I am Emma Rohr, our Vice President of Advancement here at Lifeworks, and we're really excited to have you all here this morning. Lifeworks Connects is a series of webinars and hopefully soon getting together in person to bring together our community to explore topics that support our efforts to honor choice and break down barriers, encouraging a sense of belonging for everyone. As this is our first session, we truly look forward to any feedback you have and encourage you to provide input through a survey that we'll send after our time together today. As we hear from our panelists this morning, I'd ask that you send any questions you have for the presenters through the Q&A function. And please continue to use that chat feature to leave comments, engage in conversations, and introduce yourselves to each other. I know we've pointed it out, but just to say it one more time, we are recording this session, and we will provide a link to the session via lifeworks.org on a future date. So now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator today, Allie Strong-Martin. Allie is part of the business development team at Lifeworks and spends much of her time developing and leading trainings that honor disability history, culture, and rights. We are incredibly grateful to have her innovative leadership at Lifeworks and especially grateful to have her here leading today's conversation. So Allie, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks so much, Emma, and thank you to all of you and our audience who are joining us today. We're really happy to have you here. Before I kick it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, I do want to share that we know that this is a really, really big topic, and we know that we'll likely not have all the time that we want today to discuss. So please know that we will be sharing some resources with you after the session is over. Those should be going out to you tomorrow. And so without further ado, I also want to thank our two panelists, Janda and Joe, for being here today with us. So Janda, could you please tell us about you, who you are, what you do, and how you are connected to Lifeworks?
Well, I'm Janda, and I have been with Lifeworks since 1996. And I've been through numerous different jobs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Janda, where are you calling in from?
Ecolab.
Ecolab. Okay, thank you. Awesome. All right. And we'll then ask Joe, our other panelist, to tell us a little bit about you, where you're calling in from, your background, and how you're connected to Lifeworks.
Sure. Thanks, Allie. Yeah, so I'm an attorney. I'm in Edina, and I am in my office right now. I work for a small firm that's been around a very long time. We can trace our roots back to 1886, actually. But we've been doing special needs planning, guardianships, and just working with people in general on all aspects, housing, MA and SSI eligibility. We've been doing that as a firm for over 40 years. I've been doing it personally here for the last 9. But we are connected to a lot of the different organizations, Lifeworks among them, of course, just because we have a lot of clients and they're sprinkled throughout the Twin Cities and throughout the state of Minnesota. And so we like to support the organizations that support our clients and the families and what they're doing. And so Lifeworks being one of those, we're happy to engage with this discussion and try and be helpful. I guess the last thing, that the connection for me and the reason why I do this type of work is because my youngest brother has developmental disabilities, and he works at the Driscoll's in Hopkins. He stocks shelves and bags groceries. And so we're trying to encourage his independence as much as possible. And that sort of falls in line with with the mission of Lifeworks. So happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you both for introducing yourselves. So we'll kick it off with some questions for you both. So this first question is for you, Janda. So you make your own decisions, such as where you work, what you do in your spare time, and where you live. Is that important to you? And if so, why is that important to you?
Yes, it is important because I'm most happy choosing the place where I work that is supportive of my disability.
Mm-hmm.
And I also like to learn and grow through my work. And I like to go by my words and actions for my responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
And then in my spare time, I like to do crafts like rainbow looming, beading, making microwave neck pillows, and crocheting.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you, Janda. Where do you live, or how did you make the decision about where you live?
I live in my own apartment in Apple Valley, Minnesota,
Okay.
and I've been there since May of 2005.
Okay, so you've been there for a long time.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. All right. Janda, could you tell us any more about how you made that decision about where to live in your apartment?
I made that decision through something called Section 8,
Okay.
and they helped me find the place where I'm currently living.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you. All right, we'll kick this next question. Thank you, Janda. This next question will be for Joe. So what are some of the differences that you can tell us between guardianship and between supported decision-making?
Sure. Well, first of all, this is a discussion that we have with everybody who approaches us with the question of guardianship. The first thing we try to evaluate is whether guardianship is absolutely necessary, because guardianship itself is the process of asking a court to rule that a person is incapacitated to the level that they cannot make critical life decisions on their own. And from that perspective, what you're doing is making sure that a person is not vulnerable as an adult, that they're not subject to exploitation based on the decisions they might have to make regarding their health needs, medical needs, or prescriptions, treatments, but also questions about where they live, how they take care of their personal property, and then handling any government assistance benefits like SSI or MA. When a person is capable of more independence, we encourage that as much as possible. And but we also acknowledge that that person may need a little help with those critical decisions as an adult. And so the difference between guardianship and supported decision-making, I think one of the ways that I summarize this is when you have guardianship, a guardian must make all of the decisions. That is, the court process is necessary because a judge has to determine that we're going to remove the independent or individual rights from the person and give them to a guardian for their protection. But with supported decision-making or alternatives to guardianship, it's not that another person must make decisions, it's that they may make decisions, that the individual has chosen or acknowledged that they need some assistance. And so by their choosing or by their direction, they are saying that this person may help me make healthcare decisions, but the final decision remains mine. Or this person may help me decide where to live, but the final decision is mine. And so it's really a question of what the person's capability is, and whether they can manage to make those critical decisions with just a little bit of assistance, or whether they need somebody who is making those decisions all of the time. So it's a question of, as an adult, how independent that person is capable of being, and that can be reevaluated throughout the person's lifetime. And so if they need more help as a young adult, as most young adults do, we sort of joke about the idea that almost every 18-year-old should probably still have a guardian, regardless of any diagnosis. But then it is something that they can progress and gain more independence over the years. And so it's something that you constantly look at and decide what do we have to restrict in order to protect this person, and where can they be afforded a little bit more independence. So one of the other things that we always point out, though, too, when we're talking about the decision making and who has the authority to do that, when you have guardianship, yes, some of the decisions are absolute. For instance, if a person is under guardianship, a doctor cannot prescribe medication without the guardian's approval. And so many people may think it's necessary for that. But what I want to point out, as I always do, is even a person who is under guardianship, the guardianship extends to 10 specific powers that the guardian would have. And not going to go into detail on those right now, but we can also do a limited guardianship that is specific to any one of those 10 separated powers or distinguished powers. But even if you have full guardianship, if the guardian has 10 out of the 10 statutory powers, there is still what's referred to as a Bill of Rights for a person who is subject to guardianship. And that Bill of Rights lists 17 things that a person who is under guardianship still has the independent authority to manage themselves or to make decisions about themselves. And that is also, that's part of the guardianship statute. So so it is something that, yes, there are differences between guardianship and supported decision making, and it all depends on the level of capability, level of independent ability by the individual. But there are a wide range of variations within the guardianship itself as well that we can explore when evaluating whether a person requires guardianship or not.
Mm-hmm. Thanks so much, Joe. That was a really, really thoughtful answer. And it was helpful for me to understand that difference too. I do want to pause for a second and say thanks to those of you who have put questions in our Q&A box. We will be getting to those at the end of our session today. So if anything else comes up, feel free to put those in there and we will get to those at the end. All right, this next question is for you, Janda. So what do you think people should know about what it's like navigating decision-making as a person with a disability? And are there tools and resources that you've leaned on that might be helpful to other people?
It can be hard to make your own decisions depending on the severity of your disability. It's sometimes difficult to find resources when you have trouble with like a neighbor or in relationships. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
excuse me, are there any resources or people that you've leaned on when you have to make decisions, or yeah, when there are choices that come up?
My friends, my family, my staff, my job coach, coworkers.
Yeah. Thank you, Janda. Anything else that you would want to share about what some of the decisions you've made in your life and what that's like navigating those for you? Anything else that you'd want to share?
I can't really think of any right now.
Yeah, that's totally okay. Thank you. Awesome. Okay. So Joe, we'll hand it back over to you, and thank you, Janda, for sharing. So Joe, you were discussing there's differences between guardianship and supported decision making. There's different variations of both of those. So where would you suggest that folks begin, either as a family, as individuals? Where do they begin to discuss questions about these really important issues?
Yeah, that's important, right? Because it's you can be kind of lost or overwhelmed with all of these questions, and so for me, the approach that I take as the lawyer is looking at those statutory powers of guardianship, and really asking honestly, the question, if the person is required to find a new residence, are they capable of doing that on their own, or do they need assistance? If a person is visiting a doctor, are they going to be capable of understanding their diagnoses or capable of giving their informed consent to medical treatment? If the person is reliant on government assistance benefits, can they manage to work with the county or work with the Social Security Administration in making sure that their eligibility is secured and that they're getting the benefits they need? Those are a lot of times the determining factors for guardianship, but we also look at what they may be capable of if we use the tools that are available. And so that's where the supported decision-making comes in. And supported decision-making is really, it's a concept of, let's evaluate everything that's in this person's life. Let's evaluate the decisions that they're going to have to make. Let's look at where they're going to have to exercise authority of their own, or where they could use assistance, and what level of assistance do they need. And so one of the things that we may try first is utilizing what we refer to as the less restrictive alternatives of financial power of attorney and a healthcare directive. A healthcare directive is something that a person can give their consent to a healthcare agent who can see or can view their medical records and help them make decisions. And so this is another example of you're saying to the doctors, or you're saying to medical professionals, I believe that I'm capable of making final decisions myself about my healthcare, but I may need some assistance. And for that, I consent to my healthcare agent. It could be a family member, it could be somebody else that you're close to. I consent to my healthcare agent viewing my medical records, which the doctors would otherwise be prohibited from sharing. And I consent to my healthcare agent being involved in the decision-making process. And so where we start is a discussion about those things, about those supports that could possibly be available other or as an alternative to guardianship. And then we have an honest discussion about that, of whether those supports are going to be sufficient, or whether if we rely on those entirely, if is the person going to be vulnerable. And we hope that's not the case, but that's the purpose of guardianship, is that it's there if it's needed. Now, to be honest, one of the things that we encounter that is hopefully evolving, because the idea of supported decision making is also evolving and getting more sophisticated. But one of the things that we run into that's a potential snag, I suppose, in that process is whether a medical professional, doctor's office, whether say a school like a transition program, or really any place of authority where somebody has to make a decision, whether they will accept the person's independence and their capacity to give their consent to somebody making decisions on their behalf or assisting in their decisions. That's something that advocacy is working against, but truthfully, we do still run into situations where medical professionals say, I don't believe that this person, based on their diagnosis, has the capacity to give their informed consent to a healthcare agent in this regard. So we're going to essentially demand that that a guardian be appointed to make decisions. We try and work around that with professionals. We try and do whatever is possible to help the individual with the arrangement that they want. But it is a continuing issue that that people in this community are just going to have to deal with on a case-by-case basis. So that's where really, the discussion, again, where do we start? What do we look at? That's what we're evaluating, is what are the critical decisions that this person is going to have to face in their life, and what level of assistance or authority is going to be required to make sure that that they get everything squared away, essentially, right? So, yep.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. All right, we got a couple more questions here. A lot of questions are coming in the chat and the Q&A. Janda, we will ask you this next question. I do want to catch one that's in the chat that I feel like is important. So Jenny asked you, Janda, when did you feel like you wanted to move out on your own in your own apartment?
Basically, when I graduated from high school,
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't really getting along with my dad that much.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a time I know I wanted to be on my own too after high school. Yeah.
So yeah, basically after high school.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. And thanks, Jenny, for your question. All right. Next question for you, Janda, is, we kind of talked about this already, but we know that no one makes decisions 100% independently. So all of us on this panel included. I know I can't make all my decisions on my own either. So Janda, who are the people in your life that can help you when you get stuck, or when you have a question, or when something changes in your life? So who are the people who can help you make decisions?
Well, my friends, my family, my coworkers, again, my social worker, job coach.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot of friends at church that also help me out when I need it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also put the power of prayer.
Yeah, that's awesome. Janda, could you talk? Sean is here. Sean said in the chat that he's been your job coach for the past 4 years. Do you want to say anything to Sean or about maybe how Sean helps you make decisions at work or talk about things that happen at work?
I can't really think of anything.
And if you can't think, that's totally okay too. Yeah. All right. Thank you for sharing. And thanks, Sean, for being here. All right. And we've got another question for Joe. All right. So this topic that we're talking about with guardianship, it has become a controversial subject, both within the disability community and outside of the disability community. So for Joe, what are some resources and tools that families can use to start the conversation about self-guardianship or supported decision-making, or again, other guardians or caring for the people that they love throughout their lives?
Yeah, and I think the idea of guardianship and conservatorship as well has become more controversial just in the public mind, simply because it's sort of seen as taking away a person's rights, taking away a person's independence, and we try not to focus on it that way. The guardianship is needed if or is there if needed. We certainly encourage as much independence as possible, but I understand. I mean, when this in public discussion, I think especially after all the stuff about Britney Spears that was in the news, people really have a negative view of guardianship. And it's not without merit. You know, there is some concern about how much control that guardians would exercise over an individual. And so one of the things that people should do is simply educate themselves on what guardianship and conservatorship means, and then like I said, understand the rights that a person under guardianship would still have. There are resources from the Minnesota Judicial Branch on the topic. There is an organization in Minnesota called the Minnesota Association of Guardians and Conservators. It's referred to as MAGIC as an acronym. Where people post Q&As, and there are other opinion pieces on that. I saw it come up in the chat here. A person from Volunteers of America posted some information, and that's absolutely one of the resources that we use. They're an excellent resource for information on supported decision making. They have a program there that's called the Center for Excellence in Supported Decision Making, and so they have people that are dedicated to the concept, where you can learn more about what is involved in that process, and sort of give you guidance as to what questions you need to answer and what you need to evaluate for the person to determine whether or what level of support they actually need. And I think if I remember right, maybe I'll give them a little bit of a plug, but I think that they have a drop-in clinic, sort of like a free service where you can go and get questions answered. I think that happens once a month. Maybe the person who's from VOA can clarify that, but that's something where people can go there and get questions answered about the alternatives to guardianship. Another resource like that is available in Minnesota. And there's a website, we call it Disability Hub MN, Disability Hub Minnesota. And maybe a lot of people that are associated with Lifeworks are already familiar with that as well, because it's sort of it's sort of meant to be a one-stop shop. You know, all of the information you need about helping or navigating life as a person with a disability diagnosis. And so they have a lot of information on obtaining government assistance. They have a lot of information on long-term financial planning, trust planning. And they also have a lot of information on guardianship and as well as supported decision-making. So I've always directed our clients to those two resources primarily. Those are two really good, websites, organizations as far as VOA goes, that would really be helpful to people in understanding what questions they have to ask and what they have to take into consideration. But then, yes, as well, look at the statute for guardianship. Look at the statutory powers, again, like I said, and determine what the person is capable of doing independently, and whether the guardianship may be necessary for some of those limited powers or for all of them if needed. And so in that regard, I suppose shamelessly, I'll say the last resource is an attorney, because you can meet with your attorney who is experienced in doing guardianships, and they can explain what the process is going to be there as well. You know, and you can determine whether that's going to be something that you feel is necessary to engage in, or whether you want to try the less restrictive alternatives first. And so the attorney will help you evaluate those individual statutory powers and discuss what legal issues you may encounter if you do not have guardianship, or what you should do to make sure that the healthcare directive, the financial power of attorney, would be in place. So yeah, that's just sort of a start on what resources are available to people. So
thanks, Joe. And thanks to both you, Joe, and Janda, for sharing your knowledge, your answers, and your experience with us. I think we can move now into some of the questions that we've been getting, and I will try to get to all of them. I'm checking both the chat and the Q&A. If we don't get to any of them, I know that we've got people behind the scenes who are capturing your questions. We'll try to include those in the resources as well. So Joe, you were just talking about some of those limited powers. We had a question come in to ask about if you could talk again to the difference between that limited guardianship and supported decision making, and just distinguish between those two again.
Okay, yeah. So limited guardianship would be, again, the 10 individual powers of guardianship, and you know, I won't go through them individually here, but we look at those and then try to evaluate which of those powers is necessary for another person to have, so that the person who is subject to guardianship would not be vulnerable to exploitation as an adult. And if we pursue guardianship for those powers, then that becomes, and the court agrees that that is appropriate for a guardian to have that authority, based on the principle of protection, then what happens is that the person has, or the guardian has, that absolute authority. So if you go to court and have a guardian appointed that has the power to make medical decisions on the person's behalf, what that means is that a medical professional, a doctor or a specialist or a staff member, cannot prescribe medication, cannot begin treatment, really cannot even discuss anything without the guardian's presence. Meaning the guardian has to acknowledge and has to approve any decisions that are made regarding this person's medical needs. That may sound restrictive, but it's sort of like you put yourself, if I am guardian for my brother, what the concept is that when the doctor is talking to my brother about medical decisions, the doctor has to talk to me. They cannot go out of, they cannot leave that appointment saying, we're going to change your medication to this, this, and this because we think this is going to be better for you. They can't do that without talking to me. And so that's a matter of protecting the person, because we're wondering, does that person actually understand what the doctor is telling them, and can they give their approval of any treatment? So it's a matter of making sure that there is somebody involved in that decision if need be. However, when you have supported decision making, like say with a healthcare directive, the doctor can speak directly to my brother and have a private conversation with him and say, I think that we're going to try this new treatment. And my brother can say, yeah, I think that's good. We should go ahead with that. And they don't need to contact anybody else. Otherwise, my brother can say, yeah, I sort of understand what you're saying, but I want to be sure. So I'd like my healthcare agent to be involved in this decision. And so the difference is that the doctor is allowed to let that person in to the decision-making process, but they're not required to. Whereas in guardianship, they cannot make any decisions without the guardian's involvement.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for clarifying that again. All right, we're gonna keep on moving. We got a lot of questions coming in. Janda, this is a question for you. Do you think about being your own guardian very often, or is it just the way that you live your life?
It's just the way I live my life.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that. And thanks for the question. It's just the way you live your life. All right. We got a question about who, maybe this is for Joe. So who can be a guardian? Or another question says, how does the court decide who will be a guardian? And can a guardian be changed? And if so, how can that be changed, and by whom can it be changed?
Yeah, okay. Good questions. A lot to unpack.
Yeah.
But maybe, I guess the best way to explain this is that the process of having a guardian appointed involves first filing a petition. And so that petition can be filed by anyone who the court considers an interested party. And an interested party would be like an immediate family member of the person who is subject to guardianship. And so when a petition is filed, in other interested parties can just be anybody who has a stake in what's going on with the individual's personal needs as well. So if there's not an immediate family member, it can be an extended family member. It can be a professional who is willing to work with the person. And so what you're establishing, though, or what you're hoping to establish with the court process is, number one, this person is a person who needs guardianship. And so that involves providing a description of the medical diagnosis. You also seek a statement from the person's primary care physician, who would give their opinion on whether the guardianship is appropriate or not. But then, so that's the first. You establish, is this a person that actually needs guardianship? And then the other part of the evaluation in the court process is whether the petitioner, or whether the person asking to be appointed, is the most suitable person to be the guardian. And yes, that can change. It's a voluntary position. Number one, well, first of all, you can have multiple guardians. So if you have two parents, or if you have two parents and a sister, you can have co-guardians who would share the responsibilities. The requirement in those situations is that they make unanimous decisions, though, so that there's not, internal warfare, so to speak. But in that case, when a guardian is appointed, they're constantly under the surveillance of the court. That's part of the process. Is, when a guardian is asking to be granted, or to have the individual rights of the person granted in them. And so the court's responsibility is to always look out for that person who's subject to guardianship, always look out for their individual rights and their best interest. And so if the guardians are not doing their job, they can be forcibly removed. If they are in a position that they feel like they're no longer capable of being the guardians, they can ask to resign. But if the court has determined that guardianship is necessary to protect this person, they will not allow a guardian to resign unless there are other co-guardians who are still willing to serve, or if there is a petition for a successor guardian. They will accept the resignation upon the appointment of the successor, but not before. And so it is something that can, with the guardianship, can constantly be evaluated and changed. One of the rights that the person subject to guardianship has is the right to terminate, or to petition to have the guardianship terminated at any time. That's not an easy bar to clear. They have to prove that they are more capable now than they were at the time the guardianship was granted. So essentially, what has changed that makes you more independent? So it's not something that a person who is subject to guardianship can automatically get done. The court still has to evaluate whether they would be vulnerable as an independent adult. But certainly the powers of the guardianship can be adjusted. The person who is the guardian, or who is serving as the guardian, can be replaced. And so it's always sort of looked at organically. One of the things that we have to do as attorneys is help our clients who are the guardians, essentially, file their annual reports, explaining, here's the status of the guardianship, and this is why it's still appropriate. But when there are any changes that need to be made, yes, we petition the court. We say, these are the circumstances that have changed, and this is what we'd like the court to rule at this point.
Thanks, Joe. All right. One other thing I'm looking back in the chat as you were talking, Joe, that the guardian can be changed at different times. Someone asked a question about what happens instead of if the guardian steps down, what happens if the guardian dies or passes away? Someone asked that process, who would help the person then if there's no family to take care of them if they're an older adult?
Yeah, we really hope to avoid that. One of the things that we could, but of course, you know, things like that happen suddenly occasionally. One of the things that we do is encourage a person who is close to the person subject to guardianship, whether they be a parent or a brother or sister, or especially if they are currently serving as a guardian, is indicate who you would prefer or intend to be your successor in your estate plan. You can use your own will. You can use a supplemental needs trust as an instrument that declares your intent as to who would succeed you in those situations. And the court gives a lot of weight to that if there's any dispute over who should be appointed. Otherwise, we just do our best. You know, we sort of cobble together the team, you know, the case manager, any PCAs, any support for this individual. We try and determine who would be the best replacement. And if we simply don't have a personal connection to anybody that is capable of serving or is willing to serve, then there are a number of professionals that that we can contact to take this on. It's just that with a professional guardian, they certainly do a good job, but they have a lot majority of clients. You know, whereas, you know, a family member, they're just going to have one client, right? One person that they take care of as a guardian. But a professional is going to have, I don't know, as many as they feel like taking on, I suppose. Some of them have several dozen. And so it's a question of what is going to be the best scenario for this person to get the level of support that they need.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah, but it is a difficult situation when a person passes away unexpectedly. We just do our best for, you know, the interim period until a new guardian can be appointed.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for that, Joe, and thanks for the question. I'm looking through other questions. Janda, I had a question for you about how would you feel if you weren't able to make your own decisions? Like, how would that feel if you weren't able to make the decision about where you worked or when you worked or where you lived?
I'm not real sure how to answer that.
That's okay. It's a big question. Yeah. If you think of anything, let me know or let us know. That would be great. We're getting a couple questions about if the transcript can be emailed afterwards, if links can be emailed. I see our Lifeworks folks are typing in the chat that all links will be shared out in a resource document tomorrow. We're going to work on also emailing out the transcript. So yes, there is a lot to remember here and a lot is getting covered here. So I'll take a couple more questions looking at time. We've got about 12 more minutes, so we're doing good on time. I'll ask this question. Okay, so suggestions that either of you have for how to start a conversation with a person with a disability about the possibility of pursuing guardianship or supported decision-making. So any suggestions for how to start those conversations with the person with a disability?
You're asking Janda first?
Yeah. Janda, do you have any answers to that one?
Well, I would just just talk to like, or ask my family if I needed help with making decisions, like I said before.
Mhm.
Otherwise, I'm not real sure.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Janda.
Yeah,
Joe, do you have any? Yeah.
sure. I think it's just a conversation that would be somewhat casual, right? Do you, when you go to the doctor, do you feel comfortable with what the doctor is telling you? Do you understand what the doctor is telling you? Do you feel comfortable being in that room alone? And if the doctor asks you a question, do you feel comfortable responding to that? And then what is your level of comfortability? Do you need somebody there all the time, or do you just need some help when you ask for it? That's it. With all of those issues, do you feel like you can decide where you want to live on your own? Can you review what's available? And so as far as like a housing option or living in an apartment, and do you need help with that, and what level of help do is it, can you just ask your staff person to help you find an opening for a place to live? And if they help you with that, are you capable of making that decision of whether it's an appropriate place to live? Taking all into account, can you afford it? How are you going to get to work from here? How are you going to get groceries? Do you understand the utility bills, everything that goes along with it? If you do live here, are you going to be able to cook meals yourself? Are you going to be able to clean the residence yourself? And so some of the other powers of guardianship involve those concepts like care, comfort, and maintenance needs, making sure that personal property is taken care of. We also have a concept now in guardianship that is more modern, I suppose, referred to as supervisory authority. And supervisory authority is a general term that a guardian would have the authority to monitor for the purpose of intervening and protecting a person, monitor their social media. If they're on Facebook or Instagram or something like that, it would, do you need protection from, in the form of a person who has legal authority to intervene if you feel like, there's a possibility of exploitation through social media, taking advantage of the person where they might be vulnerable. And so the discussion again would just be, you would want to have an honest evaluation of each of those concepts where a person might be subject to their own vulnerability. And so where you start is by talking about each of those things. As an adult, are you going to be comfortable managing or making these decisions on your own? Or do you feel like you still need help? And if you do, what level of help would be most appropriate?
Thanks, Joe. All right. We have a couple more questions I want to try to get to. Janda, there's another one for you. So does Janda have friends or coworkers with disabilities who have guardians? Is their life very different from yours?
Yeah, I do have friends and coworkers that have guardians.
Mm-hmm.
Like my friend Addie.
Mm-hmm.
Her parents are her guardian. But she can still make decisions on her own.
Mhm. So would you say her life is very different from yours, or is it a little bit the same?
It's a little the same, but
Okay.
it can be different also.
It can be different. Thanks, Janda. And thanks for that question. Were you going to say something else, Janda?
I can't think of anything else.
Okay, no, you're good. I thought you said something. I'm looking at two screens here. Thank you. Okay. Oh, one that's been here for a while. Joe, you were saying that a person could have two guardians or co-guardians. Is there a limited number of guardians for one person to have? Is there a limit to that?
Not by statute, but it still goes into the overall question of what is in the best interest of the person who is subject to guardianship, because there is no such thing as like a guardian in waiting. You know, you can't have 5 guardians, co-guardians appointed and say 3 of them are on the bench, you know, inactive. That doesn't, that's not a thing. So the court, if anybody is petitioning to be a co-guardian, the court has to evaluate the totality of, can these co-guardians all work together, and is having them working together in the best interest of the person subject to guardianship. And so we've had that happen. It occurs a lot with our clients who are parents who get older, you know, into their 70s, 80s, and they're concerned about their own ability to continue acting as guardians. So they will ask that their other children, like siblings of the person subject to guardianship, be appointed as co-guardians. We always have to have that understanding, because remember, you know, you're not appointing them as your apprentice. They are an active guardian. But we've had, you know, I've gone to court and had as many as 4 co-guardians appointed before. I've had occasionally a judge or two who really is uncomfortable with that idea. But, you know, it's the family's decision. If they feel like this is the best way to make sure that all of the needs of the person subject to guardianship are met, then, you know, to me, I think that, you know, who are we to interfere with that? So, you know, but I understand the court's concern, because it does, you know, you have these other actual requirements. You know, I mentioned briefly the filing of the reports. You're under the court supervision, so it's just, you want to take in all of that into consideration before you appoint multiple co-guardians.
Thanks for that, Joe. All right, we probably have time for one more question. There's a lot, there's still a couple that are left, but I'll go with this one. It's a question about how long does this process typically take in the court system?
Oh, okay, we do that quick, about 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay.
From the time we file the petition to the time we have the hearing and have the guardians appointed, the entire process is on average about 8 weeks. The hearings, though, now are all being held on Zoom. So it's something that we do a lot of work at the beginning to get the case set up, and then we just have to wait for the court hearing. And that's usually going based on the backup in the court system. That's usually going to occur about 8 weeks after the petition is filed.
Okay, thanks, Joe. All right, we are at about 2 minutes away. I just really want to thank both of you for sharing again your experience. Janda, it's been really great to hear your story about how you make decisions and the people in your life that help you make decisions about where you live, the work that you do. We're really lucky to know you and get to work with you at Lifeworks, and we just really, really appreciate you taking the time to share with us. Janda, is there anything else that you would want to say to anyone? I know that's a big question. Anything else that you'd want to say in closing to folks who are here listening with us today?
Not that I can think of at this point.
Yeah, perfect. All right, well, thank you. And thank you. I see a lot of people are in the chat. They're saying, awesome job, Janda, awesome job to Joe. And just really, really want to thank Joe, also you for sharing your expertise and experience with us. And thank you to everyone who called in today. A lot of really great things, great information was shared. And we just really appreciate you taking the time with us today. So some of our Lifeworks folks are in the chat sharing that we will be getting resources to you in the next day or so. We will send we'll have the recording available at a later date. So we really thank you all for your time today. And we hope that you have a great rest of your morning and a great rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you, Allie. Thank you for having us here.
Thank you.